Good morning, everyone. My name is Zina Mohammed, and I'm delighted to be chairing this session. After this introduction, the session will consist of our main speaker's presentation, which will last for about 40 minutes. Following the 40-minute presentation, we'll hear from our formal respondents who will give their brief comments and questions, to which the speaker will then have a chance to reply. Finally, we'll open the floor up to you, our audience members, for questions. Please note that this event is being filmed for broadcast by the Sacramento Educational Cable Consortium. Our first speaker for the symposium is Dr. Anthony Bradley. Dr. Bradley is an interdisciplinary and theological studies professor at Kuiper College, as well as a distinguished research fellow at the Acton Institute. He has written on a range of contemporary issues, including the topics of mass incarceration and overcriminalization, trauma, family, poverty, education, and social ethics. His dissertation explores the intersection of Black liberation, theology, and economics. Some of his books include Faith and Society, Why Black Lives Matter, and Heroic Fraternities. Today, Dr. Bradley is here to speak to us about personalism as a solution to political polarization. I ask that you now join me in welcoming Dr. Bradley up.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm delighted to be here on this 20th anniversary. I am particularly thankful to Professor Swan and Schubert for the invitation, President Bush and President Wood. Also, I'd like to thank them for their invitation. President Wood and I are fraternity brothers, so it's always good to have someone in the fold as a head of an institution like this. So today's topic, we are going to explore a theory that was introduced right after World War II, really honed in there, that has a major influence on American political discourse. I want to begin by reading a letter that was written to a columnist in the Village Voice. I don't know if anyone's heard of the Village Voice. I lived in New York City for about 14 years. And in the Village, in the West Village, there has been a magazine that's several decades old called the Village Voice, and they have a column in the back there. And during this time, there was a columnist named Andrew W.K. He was for those of you that are bald and gray hair, you probably know who this is, but he was sort of a rock, sort of death metal guy, black fingernail polish and black hair and kind of a head-banging sort of guy. But he got this column in the Village Voice. I will edit, just because this is an academic environment, I'll edit the official title of this letter. I'll let you fill in the blanks here. But this is what was written. The title of this is My Dad is a Right-Wing Part of the Body in the Back. I'll just say it that way. So this is what the letter says. I'm writing to you. Hi, Andrew. I'm writing to you because I just can't deal with my father anymore. He's a 65-year-old super right-wing conservative who was basically turned into a total person in the back, intent on ruining our relationship and our planet with his politics. I'm more or less a liberal Democrat with very progressive values, and I know that people like my dad are going to destroy us all. I don't have any good times with him anymore. All we do is argue. When I try to spend time with him without talking politics or discussing any current events, there is still an underlying tension that makes it really uncomfortable. Don't get me wrong. I love him no matter what. But how do I explain to him that his politics are turning him into a monster, destroying the environment, and pushing away the people who care about him? This is Andrew W.K.'s response. Dear son of a right-winger, go back and read the opening sentences of your letter. read them again, then read the rest of your letter, then read it again. Try to find a single instance where you refer to your dad as a human being, a person, or a man. There isn't one. You've reduced your father, the person who created you, to a set of beliefs and political views and how it relates to you, and you don't consider your dad a person of his own standing. He's just, quote unquote, your dad. You've also reduced yourself to a set of opposing views and reduced your relationship with him to a fight between the two. The humanity has been reduced to nothingness, and all that is left in its place is an argument that will never really be won. And even if one side did win, it probably wouldn't satisfy the deeper desire to be in a state of inflamed, passionate conflict. The world is not being destroyed by Democrats or Republicans, red or blue, liberal or conservative, religious or atheists. The world is being destroyed by one side believing the other side is destroying the world. The world is being hurt and damaged by one group of people believing that they are truly better people than the other side who thinks differently. The world officially ends when we let our beliefs conquer love. We must not let this happen. And the letter continues with this framing of love, and then he concludes with this. Love your dad because he's your father. Because he made you, because he thinks for himself, and most of all, because he is a person. Have the strength to doubt and question what you believe as easily as you are so quick to doubt his beliefs. Live with a truly open mind, the kind of open mind that even questions the idea of an open mind. This is what philosophers do for a living, by the way. Philosophers, will have a whole discourse on the definition of is. He continues, he says, don't feel the need to always pick a side. And if you do pick a side, pick the side of love. It remains our only real hope for survival and has more power to save us than any other belief we could ever cling to. Your friend, Andrew W.K. So what happened in this exchange? Andrew W.K. wanted the son to see behind the politics and remember that his father was a person, a human, his father. The same man that the son vomited on when he was an infant and needed his dad to help him tie his shoe. This letter reveals a troubling trend that we find ourselves in today. We are so ideologically polarized and tribal, and we no longer love. In general, the beautiful thing about our connection is our affection for one another, and we have lost that. What we've done in our current political context is put principles before our love for people. So that today we love people because they assent to our particular principles, not because they are human. The son of the right winger was told to love his father because his father was unlike him. This is the nature of tribalism. We value people conditionally. If they believe what we believe, then we accept them. If they have the same enemies we do, then they are our allies. If they hate what we hate and love what we love, then they are worthy of our time and our affection and our care. In this environment, we consistently place politics and abstract principles before people. Progressives and conservatives alike proceed in the exact same way when thinking about social issues and the quote-unquote correct response to them. In fact, beginning in the 1960s, Americans began to geographically sort themselves along political and social tribal lines. As Bill Bishop documents in the book The Big Sort, people increasingly chose to live in communities with others who shared their lifestyles and their worldviews. This created ideological enclaves where alternative viewpoints were not just disagreed, but were rarely even encountered. The powerful institutions in our society, from media organizations to civic groups, often built an infrastructure that depends on this ideological homogeneity, promising safety from the influence of the enemy tribes who are not only quote-unquote wrong-headed, but also politically opposed. Prior to this sorting, people from different political parties and with disagreeing ideologies were more likely to be members of the same local institutions, the same churches, the same soccer clubs, the same civic institutions. They were more likely to be members of the same bowling leagues and the Rotary clubs. They were bonded by a civic life together, a local identity. These days, however, this is largely a thing of the past. Now we often only want to be around people who are like us. Even worse, we've devolved into a state where progressives ghettoize themselves with other progressives because they believe that they are the only ones who understand the truth about justice. They're the only ones who care about justice. And conservatives also ghettoize themselves with other conservatives because they believe they are the only ones who understand liberty and freedom. What I'd like to introduce is the philosophical tradition of personalism. This is a powerful alternative that focuses on the importance of people. As a body of thought that emerged in Europe after World War I, it recognized that ideological tribalism is more about determining which group wins rather than about discovering what is best for people. Its principal exponent in the early days was a French philosopher named Emmanuel Mounier, who saw a crisis of modernity in which political and economic ends were consistently used to dehumanize people. As one scholar explains, quote, the personalist movement arose to challenge what it saw as the root crisis, as the root causes of the crisis, at the center of which was a profound dehumanization, or better, depersonalization, which had taken place. The social order was dominated by economic and political megaprocesses and megastructures based on ways of thinking which abstracted away from the person. Personalism teaches us to value people simply because they are people. It is a system of thought that regards the person as the ultimate explanatory and ethical principle of all reality. It forces us to recognize that our neighbor is not merely someone who belongs in our tribe, but is simply the one who is a person. This is the same philosophical tradition, the very same philosophical wellspring that deeply influenced the nonviolent movement of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who saw the inherent dignity of every individual as the foundation for social justice. In fact, Martin Luther King Jr.'s worldview was profoundly and uniquely shaped by personalism, which he learned at Boston University under thinkers like Edgar Brightman and Howard DeWolf. In fact, King identified this personalist ideal as, quote, his basic philosophical position, defining it as a theory so that the clue to the meaning of ultimate reality is found in personality. And this philosophy fortified his convictions in two crucial ways. It provided strong metaphysical and philosophical grounding for his belief in a personal God and mostly for his life's work. It was personalism that gave in his own words, the metaphysical basis for the dignity and worth of all human personality. This foundational belief in the inherent worth of every person became the cornerstone in his advocacy for the civil rights movement and for human dignity and human flourishing. One way to summarize this is that the civil rights movement itself, by definition, led by Martin Luther King Jr., was a movement of personalism. It was so much about the human person that during the movement in Memphis, right before Dr. King was assassinated, they made some placards that simply read this as men and women marched around. It simply said this: "I am a man." And it was intended on purpose to say, treat me as a person, not according to a stereotype, not according to group identity, but the placard just simply said, I am a man. I am a human being. Personalism came to be defined as the philosophical framework that offers a robust protection against political tribalism and political polarization by elevating the unique and inviolable dignity of the person above any group or ideology or political collective. Personalism directly counters the core tenets of political tribalism by positing that the person is the ultimate explanatory, epistemological, ontological, and axiological principle of all reality. Whereas tribalism demands that the group's interests, the group's identity, and moral institutions come first. The tradition of Martin Luther King Jr. and others frames personalism that insists that the individual person, the human person, is the proper starting point for all philosophical and ethical reflections. It arose specifically as a reaction to dehumanization and depersonalization. The central tenets of personalism serve as a bulwark against dehumanization inherent in political tribalism in three ways. Number one is the inherent and inviolable dignity of the human person. Personalism asserts that every person possesses an inviolable dignity that merits unconditional respect. This dignity is not a price set by a community or state, but is an inherent and intrinsic worth that exceeds all price. This principle makes it ethically impossible to treat a political opponent as a mere means to an end, as their personhood confers an absoluteness not found in other beings. In a polarized environment where opponents are often seen as interchangeable members of a reviled group, personalism forces a recognition of each individual's unique, irreplaceable value. Secondly, it provides an alternative beyond the extremes of collectivism and the streams of individualism. Political polarization is often a conflict between competing collectives or tribes, which can be fueled by appeals to radical self-interest. Personalism, however, critiques both of these extremes. It resists the absorption of the individual into a collectivity by asserting that the state exists for persons and not persons for the state. Simultaneously, it rejects a radical individualism that views other persons as means to one's own profit, proposing instead that personal fulfillment requires a decentralization of the self that is open to others. Thirdly, personalism values communion over tribal association. Personalism replaces the tribal impulse of group cohesion with a higher calling for interpersonal communion. This is not simply existing in society, but is, quote, a mode of being and acting in common through which the persons involved mutually confirm and affirm one another. This is achieved through what personalists call the law of the gift, where a person realizes that their true self precisely when they make a disinterested gift of self to another person. This model of self-giving love is the direct antithesis of tribalism, which demands loyalty to the in-group and animosity toward the out-group. In summary, by establishing the absolute worth of each person, personalism fundamentally challenges the logic of political tribalism. It forbids the reduction of individuals to mere members of a political group and reframes human relations not as a zero-sum conflict between tribes, but as a mutual vocation to affirm the dignity of the other through authentic communion and connection. The crisis today is that we do not know how to engage with people who are not like us. Our current tribalism is getting us nowhere fast, and it seems that what we need is a heavy dose of personalism. The challenge of tribalism forces us to confront a prior and more fundamental question: what is a person? Tribalism answers that a person is an avatar for an ideology, an ally, or an enemy. Personalism insists that a person is a unique, unrepeatable being with inherent dignity, irreducible to their political affiliations. Have you ever sat down and written out a definition of what makes a person a human being? What is it about human beings that makes us worthy of love and connection and makes us destined for certain ends, not simply as means to gaining and maintaining political power? Sociologists like Christian Smith answered that what is a person completely characterizes and incentivizes and structures the way we think about politics and economics and social justice. Now, this is his very short and brief definition of what he means by a person. This is from his book, What is a Person? Rethinking Humanity, Social Life, and the Moral Good, from the Person Up. This is the University of Chicago Press in 2010. This is his definition of what it means to be human. Quote, by person, I mean a conscious, self-trending center of subjective experience, durable identity, moral commitment, and social communication who, as the efficient cause of his or her own responsible actions and interactions, exercises complex capacities for agency and intersubjectivity in order to develop and sustain his or her own incommunicable self in loving relationships with other personal selves and with the non-personal world. That's his brief definition. And then he goes on to unpack that in 400 pages. It would take me at least an hour, of course, to fully unpack the contours of the definition, but it really centers on this idea that instead of focusing our efforts on political ideology and tribalism, we should focus our efforts on building a concept of justice from the person up, not from ideology and tribalism down. So what does this mean? It means that when you see another human being, you do not see an individual, you see a person. These are not the same thing. In modern political and economic thought, an individual is often treated as an atomized unit, a bundle of rights and self-interests to be managed. A person, however, by definition, is interdependent and integrated into the entire social fabric of human community. Our tribal frameworks view people as individuals. They are a means to political ends. They are a means to economic ends. They are a means to winning the culture war. But when people are viewed merely as individuals, our goals for them become set in terms of ultimately depersonalizing them. Individuals become abstractions to be theorized about in a materialistic framework. Demographic statistics, economic units to be managed, or political obstacles to be overcome. As persons, we are conscious centers of experience. We look inwardly and have the capacity to deeply care for others. We are unique and irreplaceable. No two people have ever been exactly alike and never will be. We make moral evaluations of ourselves and others. We cause things to happen in a world beyond mere instinct, with intentions oriented around future perceived outcomes. More importantly, persons are necessarily social. That is, we only know ourselves in relationship and in connection with others. We want to love and to be loved. We crave connection and seek constantly to build it. There is no such thing as a person outside of relationships with others, and it is through shared experience that we feel we belong and make meaning in life. The central question of personalism, then, is this: what relationships and structures and institutions are necessary for human beings to truly be who they are and what they are? And neither the Democratic Party nor the Republican Party, neither progressive ideology nor conservative ideology can fully answer this question, because this question is not answered by politics, though we desperately want it to be. This leads to a fundamental takeaway that whatever you believe constitutes the nature of the human person determines the political and economic structures you believe lead to human flourishing. I'll say that again. Whatever you believe constitutes the nature of the human person determines the political and economic structures you believe will lead to human flourishing. And when we get this wrong, when we get the nature of the human person wrong, when we undermine the dignity of other people and get this wrong, it's not simply that it leads to disagreement, it leads to death. It leads to pain, it leads to suffering, and it leads to injustice. I'll give you a great example from the history of eugenics. From 1906 to 1927, over 8,000 white women were forcibly sterilized, a practice protected by state law, so that poor whites would not continue to populate regions of the Midwest, the Ohio River Valley, the South, and Appalachia. Eugenics supporters traveled around the country chronicling the lives of poor whites to make the case that they should not procreate with each other, their relatives, or other minorities like African Americans or Native Americans. Their program of forced sterilization was enshrined in law in a landmark 1927 Supreme Court case, Buck versus Bell. And in this case, Carrie Buck protested her involuntary 1924 commitment to the Virginia Colony for Epileptics and the Feeble-Minded. After giving birth out of wedlock, Bell was declared feeble-minded, as were many poor whites in the country at the time. And Bell was institutionalized and slated for involuntary sterilization. Carrie Buck objected, lost the case, and was sterilized. In an 8-1 majority, Oliver Wendell Holmes opined this, quote, "It is better for all the world, instead of waiting to execute degenerate offspring for crime, or to let them starve for their imbecility, society can prevent those who are manifesting unfit from continuing their kind. The principle that sustains compulsory vaccination is broad enough to cover cutting the fallopian tubes." And then he says this as a conclusion: 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. In fact, by 1923, the American Eugenics Society had recruited prominent clergy in advisory roles like Massachusetts Episcopal Bishop William Lawrence, New York's Harry Fossick, William Elliott, head of the service work for Northern Baptists, leading Quakers like Rufus Jones. And this mission about eugenics was uniquely tied to getting rid of people that were deemed to be a drag and an impediment to progress. When you get the anthropology wrong, people die. When you get anthropology wrong, injustice happens. And the Buck versus Bell case and the proliferation of eugenics is a prime example of what happens when you put policy above people. When you put ideology above the human person. And as many of you know, that eugenics movement that started with the sterilization of poor whites expanded to the sterilization of African American women. It expanded to the sterilization of incarcerated women, even to this day. Because incarcerated women aren't people, they're incarcerated people. And we need to do, as was said in the Buck versus Bell case, eliminate the possibility of their offspring being a net negative to society. See, the human person is an acting person, a person with purposeful behavior. And Ludwig von Mises describes action as, quote, will to put into operation and transformed into agency, aiming at ends and goals, and is also the ego's meaningful response to stimuli to the conditions of the environment. This is a person's conscious adjustment to the state of the universe that determines his or her life. And applied to economics and public policy, the acting person is eager to substitute a more satisfactory state of affairs for a less satisfactory state of affairs. A person perfectly content with the state of affairs, of this state of affairs or her state of affairs, would have no incentive to change things. He or she would neither have wishes nor desires. And von Mises reminds us that the ultimate goal of human action is always the satisfaction of the actant person's desires, that human dignity and human action is ultimately about human flourishing. So applied to economics and public policy, personalism wants to ask three basic questions. What conditions, number one, what conditions allow the greatest number of people to exercise the creative and innovative capacities that constitute the vocation of being human? Number two, what economic conditions provide the greatest opportunity for human flourishing? Number three, what economic environments and public policy environments facilitate human persons excelling in moral virtue by exercising free and responsible participation in the common good? Economic personalists contend that maintaining a proper anthropology is the foundation to achieving the adequate synthesis of both public policy and economics. In the past, theories within social science have tended to be overly rationalistic, unduly collectivistic, utilitarian, or weak regarding the metaphysical dimensions of human existence. Economics, by definition, is the study of human action in the marketplace, and so the human person is essential to both economic and public policy reflections. These two sciences intersect in the human person and provide systematic ways of analyzing human action. A proper synthesis of both cannot afford an incomplete anthropology, because the human person must be not only understood in terms of their action, but a rich moral and virtuous life that is also incarnate in what it means to be human. The central question of personalism at the end is simply this: what relationships and structures and institutions are necessary for human beings to be what they were created to be? Not because of ideology, not because of tribalism, but because they are persons, conscious, self-trending centers of subjective experience. Persons who have their own creativity, their own inner agency, their own capacity for love and affection and connection, their own capacity to make contributions to the common good, their own capacity to make lives better for other people. How do we, by thinking about public policy and justice from the person up, release this into the common good? So when you look at a person in the eyes, the next time you're at the grocery store or at CVS, what do you see? What do you see when you're sitting across the table having lunch with someone? What do you see when you're in class sitting next to each other? What do you see when you're looking at your professors? What do you see when you're having conversations with someone with whom you deeply disagree? What I want to propose is that every encounter with another human being is an opportunity for liberation. It's a chance, in communion with one another, to explore what it means to be truly human. This cannot mean that we only do this with people like us. One of the most culturally subversive acts today is to have this genuine regard for people that transcends tribal norms of our era. As I conclude, I want to offer some recommendations for moving forward by putting the person at the center. Number one is to move in a neighborhood with people with whom you disagree. To actually have friends in your circle with whom you politically disagree. Eat with them, laugh with them, suffer together with them, connect with them. Experience hospitality with those with whom you disagree because you're more interested in the human person than you are winning the argument. You're more concerned about understanding each other because you value the inherent dignity of the person with whom you're speaking. If our civic institutions modeled a personalist ethic, the white-collar and the blue-collar worker would be sitting at the same table. Democrats and Republicans would be at the same table. Liberals and conservatives would be at the same table. They'd be drinking coffee together, eating wings together, eating carrot cake together. They would be loving and caring for each other together because what they want to do is pursue what's true for the human person. So ultimately, what we want for people is not the fulfillment of a political vision we prefer, but for them to flourish in every respect of what it means to be human. We connect this with those who are different from us on purpose because it is only in relationship with the other that we can both become truly and fully human. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Bradley. That was a truly inspiring presentation. We'll now hear from our former respondents before turning to you, the audience, for questions. Our first respondent is the esteemed Assistant Professor of Philosophy at the University of Arizona, Professor Hrishikesh Joshi.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for that presentation. And I really like this idea of personalism as a sort of antidote to polarization. So I guess I want to start off with a question I have, and I really want to hear your thoughts on this. But at some point you said, well, what is the policy sort of prescription of personalism? And at one point, the way you put it is, well, how do you create the conditions that enable the greatest number of people to flourish in terms of what it really means to be human? And I really like that as a sort of general principle. The one thought I wanted to hear your thoughts on is, like, if you look at history and if you look at some of the bloodiest regimes in history, part of what they saw themselves as doing is to try to create the conditions that most people can flourish. So if you think of the French Revolution or the various revolutions in the 20th century, so that seems like a potential trap, and I wanted to hear your thoughts on how we avoid that trap, because I think what you're talking about in terms of, when that interpersonal relation goes away, injustice happens. So I just wanted to hear more about what you think. Thank you.
Yeah, very, very good. Thanks so much. That's a very, very fair question. I think that historically, one of the things that did not happen is to have the conversation first about what it means to be human. So what happens, especially in terms of public policy, is we're often debating about issues. We're debating about policies. We're debating about ideology. But there's a debate we have to have before that. And the discussion that we are not having that precedes that, and this, in my view, avoids the trap, is first coming together to sort of seek the truth together about what it means to be human, and then to derive our policies from that place. And what I'm advocating for is for us to take a break on political polarization, the culture war, and to first have a conversation about what it means to be human. And that as a starting point avoids, in my view, we've seen this historically, it sort of avoids that trap, but we're not having that conversation first. Just by way of historical reference, it was personalism that framed the UN Declaration of Human Rights. That's a personalist document. And again, the point was to define what it means to be human and then talk about how it is that as a world of nations, we can avoid the sorts of tragedies that lead to lots of war and death. And that's a conversation, sort of big ontological conversation that we're not having right now. I want us to take a pause and talk about that first. And historically, it's been ideology that drives, and I want the human person, I want the human person to drive, and for us to have that conversation first. Now, in fairness, it's messy, right? Ideology is easy, right? It's Manichaean, right? Good versus evil, bad people, right? The enemy of my enemy is my friend, that sort of thing. But discussing together what it means to be human is very, very messy and slow. And I want us philosophically to work together to sort of have that conversation first.
Thank you, Professor Bradley. We'll now hear from another one of our former respondents, my fellow CRC honors student, Inder Singh.
Hello, check. Cool, it's on. So, first of all, great presentation. I liked a lot of the points that you made in terms of believing one another to be human and first looking at the person before you see the problem or the opposing ideology. But one thing that I did want to get your thoughts on is, especially in today's modern political climate, how would you recommend some people to be more open with people of opposing opinions? Because you have, to specify it to my generation, you have, kids going to college and they don't want to room with kids who are of the opposing political spectrum, or even having partners of the opposing political spectrum. And while I don't call them out, I do think that it's important to still coexist and cohabitate. How would you recommend they find it in their hearts to accept one another and actually coexist rather than just constantly argue?
Fantastic question. So again, this sort of to drive home the point, we dehumanize people with whom we disagree. We don't see them as people. We see them as the other, the enemy. And one of the things that I would offer is that we need to humanize people with whom we disagree, and to explore the reasons that they believe what they believe, and not assuming that they're evil, or not assuming, as the letter was written to ADWK, that they're dangerous, that they're violent, that they're trying to destroy the world. But first of all, they're persons. They have stories, they have pain, they have suffering, they have histories. They have reasons that they have arrived at those conclusions, and let's do something different by exploring and listening first to the reasons that people have to believe what they believe, and let's have a conversation about those reasons. We argue about the outcomes. We don't often have a discussion, because we're not in connection with one another, about the ontological or anthropological or even experiences in terms of trauma, in terms of issues that happen in their lives. Why do you believe what you believe? And that by definition requires relationship. This is why I said at the end that you want to make sure that you have friends with people with whom you disagree, so that you don't dehumanize them because you love them, because you care about them. If you care about them first as people, then you'll be much less likely to dehumanize them or just assume they're stupid because they're actually your friends. So one of the things that especially for students, this would sort of be a a pipe dream of sorts. I would love it. I would love it if students who ideologically disagreed were like roommates. I would love it if students who were ideologically opposed had meals together, long meals together, family-style meals together, to humanize and to care for each other. I would love it only for those who are over 21. I would love it for those who are over 21, who are from different belief systems, would actually go out and have a few beers together, long conversation together, talk over quality beer, not like Miller Lite, but the good stuff, right? To sort of do that over time and to really embrace the other with affection, right? And to really rehumanize the person with whom we disagree, because that, to me, is part of the problem, is dehumanization and depersonalization. So I would encourage to do whatever is necessary with those with whom we disagree to create those contexts where there's a lot of affection and a lot of connection, intimacy, like go swing dancing together, laugh together, play soccer together, go bowling together, enjoy each other together, and then you can have those conversations because there's mutual affection, and you see the person as someone worthy of listening to. And I think lastly here, one of the problems is that we want to have these conversations and debates outside a relationship. I want to put the relationship at the center and then have the debate.
Thank you.
That was very well said. Our next and final respondent is my fellow CRC honors student, Marley Duncan.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. I'm very honored to be here. So in your talk, you briefly mentioned morals and actions that relate to what it means to be human. And I think the morals bit of it, I don't think you talked, you went into detail about that, but I am curious about how to navigate moral disagreement. Context for where I'm coming from. I'm trans, and I have had many difficult conversations with people who interpreted my identity as being a result of confusion or a misstep in mental health or parental support. And even though those interpretations are on the basis of being human, they're misunderstandings of the trans experience that I believe strip trans people of their self-agency. And attempting to navigate disagreement and take meaningful action through this lens of misguided solidarity, I think casts aside the medically and psychologically supported reality of trans people, for example. I guess I'm interested in a bigger picture how you would reconcile that type of moral dissonance with the pursuit of solidarity.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So if you think about it historically, one of the things that we've done with respect to the law is use the law as a moral teacher in terms of what is right and what is wrong. So we think about stealing, think about murder. We have a whole list of felonies and misdemeanors, and hopefully, I'm at this university, so no one's ever had any contact with the police here. This is a great community. You guys don't ever do anything like that, right? But at other schools, what's a rival of this school? UC Davis. The criminals over at UC Davis, they've had lots of interaction with the police. So by moral, we already have an entire battery of content that explains the contours of what defines social injustice. By moral, I don't necessarily mean a religious expression of that. By moral, I'm talking about the fact that we have a set of laws that says it is wrong to steal somebody's car. We have a battery of statutes that say it's wrong to physically assault someone. We have a battery of laws and statutes already that introduce restrictions against fraud, against taking advantage of the poor and things like that. So by moral, I'm much more thinking about the ways in which the rule of law actually helps us navigate a society where people have to get along and make life work. Sometimes we have too many laws. I mean, I should say sometimes, a lot of times we have too many laws. I'm sure there are things that are illegal in this state that you have no idea that you're breaking laws. I mean, there's some states where skateboarding in front of a building is an arrestable offense, things like that. So by moral, I'm actually more concerned about the application of the rule of law so that everyone is treated the exact same way. We don't preference anyone. And it's actually that rule of law that determines the means by which we do community together. And by maybe re-engaging the rule of law rather than the rule of opinion, the rule of ideology, the rule of political polarization, that one of the mysteries, particularly of the West and even in this great experiment of the US, is that the founders wanted the rule of law, not the rule of men, to determine the contours of how we make society work. And so I want everybody, regardless of their affiliations, to be treated in the exact same way, and that requires a certain respect for and appreciation for the rule of law. We really don't want anyone to take advantage of anyone else. And so by moral, I'm much more speaking about the law as a teacher, as a tutor for us about what we should and should not do. Now, last thing here, it doesn't mean that it's internalized. That is, it doesn't mean that people internally believe that it's a right or wrong thing to do. But the law at least provides the guardrails for behavior that the social contract has deemed inadmissible for us to have a common life together. We cannot have a society without the rule of law where we respect each other's persons and respect each other's bodies and respect each other's property. This is the way that we pursue what is good and what is true and what is beautiful.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bradley. We'll now turn to you, our audience, for questions. Dr. Schubert will moderate this portion of the session.
Thank you again so very much for being here. It is important to us that you not merely hear from those of us up here on the stage, but that we hear from you and that you have the chance to interact with us.
Hello. So I really like your approach on personalism and being an antidote to polarization. However, I feel like personalism is a solution for preventative division. And so once we're getting to a point to where, the way I get in a lot of political discussions just because of my own personal experience working on, let's say, exploitation. And so we're at this point in society where a portion of this divide believes in the willful policy engagement of slavery through forced pregnancy for women and other things that are entirely devoid of a common ground to talk on. And so one thing I always reflect on is when, for example, there's a saying in Germany, if a Nazi is sitting at a table and 10 people are talking to the Nazi, there's 11 Nazis. And so it's really difficult to traverse that conversation because it's there's bad faith actors and they're not willing to have a conversation, especially when it comes to humanizing. Because when you try to humanize the effects of their policies, the effects of what they're doing to other people, it's just a doubling down and it's just honestly, it just creates the divide even further. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think this is one of the the mysteries of democracy. I mean, the way our system is supposed to work is that we have these debates about policy that are asking the central question first: does this policy actually contribute to human flourishing or not? And what are some of the potential negative externalities that this policy might introduce that might undermine human flourishing? And to have that debate first. And the extent to which that debate is absent, I mean, this is how the system is supposed to work. We're supposed to, right, in the state legislatures, also in Congress, we're supposed to be going back and forth debating the implications of policy, not just whether or not we like the policy, but if it's actually going to contribute and produce the ends that we want it to produce. And to be thinking about this, if we institute the policy, then what? So what sort of incentive structures are going to be introduced following the implication of the policy that might lead to a bunch of externalities we hadn't thought about before? And to have that conversation based on human nature. What do people actually like? What do people love? What do people desire? How do people move? How do people respond to policy? And put that in the forefront as we think about what we should or should not do. That by keeping the person at the center, it could actually help us negotiate the various advantages or disadvantages or pros and cons of very imperfect policy. So we're not really thinking about which policy is ideologically good or bad or right versus wrong, but which one is actually going to be helpful to people given those anthropological contours of what it means to be human, to be a transcending self, to be someone who needs other people, to be someone who's creative, to be someone who can make contributions to the common good. Is this going to liberate them to do that? Or is it going to constrain them in the context of power from being really human? And that's the debate a few of us are trying to, Christian Smith and Jonathan Haidt, et cetera, we're all trying to get people back to that. Let's first talk about how these policies impact people, and then we can evaluate, right, in terms of how good or bad or useful or unuseful these policies are. But we want to start with what we believe about people and what they actually need and how they move around. So to sum up, we've got the cart before the horse. And I want to put the anthropological horse in front of the public policy cart, right? And to have that debate. Are we going to disagree? Absolutely, right? But what we have in common is caring about people. If we truly care about people, care about their flourishing, then we'll be willing to negotiate in ways that we didn't in the past. I'll give you a quick example. During the Cold War, we haven't seen this since the Cold War ended, and I'm not saying we should go back to the Cold War. We had much more space for compromise in Congress during the Cold War. Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill used to work together on things. They had disagreements, but one of the things they shared in common was that we had this common enemy, so we had to come together in solidarity to sort of make the country work because we had this common enemy. When the Cold War ended, Republicans and Democrats, instead of turning to the outside enemy, turned on each other. And so by the time we get to Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich, the enemy was no longer the outside threat. Now it was the inside threat. It was the person across the aisle. And this was when this was the inauguration of the beginning of the kind of tribalism and polarization that we see today. During the Cold War, Democrats and Republicans used to hang out together. Their kids would go to each other's birthday parties and they would do anniversaries together. They had deep relationship with one another, and that all dissipated in the mid 1990s. It just evaporated. So I want to sort of get us back to some of that.
I really appreciate everything you shared. One of my favorite quotes is that we don't fight hate with hate, we fight it with love. So that's a high calling. For me personally, I find the ability to keep facing that through my relationship with God. And I think you alluded to Martin Luther King also having that. But as we look at policies and everything and do try to do justice work, those are policy levels. I think it's so important not to forget the individual. Like you were saying, when we see someone at the, grocery store, or if it's one of those dang people that certainly don't know how to drive right in front of us, what our thoughts are, how we deal with people, even people that we might not have words with, but how we interact with people. So my question is that for me personally, I find, the words, the scriptures to help me, to encourage me to keep going when it gets hard, when it doesn't seem like it's making any difference, when it feels like I'm being used or overlooked or anything. Just keep going and keep doing the fighting the hatred with love. But what would you say on a personal level? How do we keep that going when we feel discouraged, why we feel like we're not making any difference? Maybe we're being a fool. Maybe we should embrace some of those other things. Maybe we should just congregate with people that we agree with, because that's where we find the strength to go on.
That's a fantastic question. I think one of the things it's important for us to remember when you look at these things historically is that you may not live to see the fruit of your love and labor, and that is called normal. I mean, think about this. Martin Luther King Jr. never really got to see the impact that he had on the world. And that's okay. And the encouragement is really not to think about this in terms of a drive-through fast food era of seeing the results immediately, right? Lincoln never really got to see some of the things that his work did. Quick story. My last name is Bradley. I am from the Bradley slave plantation in Escambia County, Alabama. We were sold by another family down the road to the Bradleys. Most of my family still lives within about an hour of that slave plantation. My dad's grandfather was born on a slave plantation. And my ancestors would never have imagined that all of their struggle during slavery, all of their struggle during the civil rights movement would put me at a table like this today. But they had hope that their struggle would lead to the liberation and the freedom of their great-great-great-great-grandchildren to do things that they never could have imagined to be done. And so what I can say proudly is that not only are we from that plantation, my family now owns it. We bought it. And I would say it this way, only in America could you have this sort of history without bloody revolution, that we now own the property that owned us. And what kept them going? They had hope. And I think that we've lost hope often, that the work that we do, because we can't see the immediate results, may not be worth it. I want to encourage people to keep pushing. Even though you may never see the results of your labor, it is making a difference. And you have to believe that with a lot of hope, because I can tell you historically that it's true.
First of all, thank you guys so much for holding this discussion. I think it's incredibly important, and I'm glad I have the opportunity to stand up and ask you a question. My question centers around the topic of perhaps that our two-party system, mainly two-party system, where we vote either Democrat or Republican, potentially breeds tribalism inherently. And I really love kind of what you're talking about with personalism. I think that it's incredibly important that personalism is held, I guess, as something we should all seek and work towards as a country and as a society. I just struggle with the idea that perhaps our two-party system and personalism maybe aren't so compatible, if that makes sense. So I'm wondering, I understand that, your position is that we slowly work towards something better by seeing each other as human, and I totally agree. I just wonder if that's enough to combat the, I guess, inherent design of a two-party system and the fact that it does breed tribalism. So I wonder what your thoughts are on that. Thank you again.
Yeah, you're very welcome. So, fantastic question. I think we need more parties. I mean, personally, I think our two-party system has us in slavery to some of these things. I'm like, bring back the wigs. No, I'm kidding. So we need more diversity, I think, in terms of the discourse. I will say this: I don't assume we're at an impasse, and I have a lot of hope that we can move beyond this. But I think that, again, what we need to do is do the slow work. And that begins at the local level. We're talking about city councils, county commissions. That's where the hard work is. We're talking more about state legislatures. That's where the rubber meets the pothole. As we work on these things in our local communities, it actually trickles up. I think people think that we need to do the federal thing and trickle down. Revolution actually starts from the local community up. So I would say wherever you're from, city council, county commission, to actually do the work locally to sort of push beyond the tribalism and to, again, not let ideology frame those with whom we interact on these issues. I completely agree that we seem to be stuck in terms of some of these categories, but I'm calling for a revolution. I'm calling for a revolution of human dignity, a revolution of the human person, and I'm looking for a university, maybe it's this one, to launch a revolution where we're going to be focused on what's best for people, even if, by the way, what's best for people may be contrary to what our tribe says. We want to do that. First and with reckless abandon. And we need much more diversity in the discourse rather than the binary that we're stuck in, the sort of Manichaean thinking there. Jonathan Haidt's book, The Righteous Mind, I would recommend as a possible resource to helping discern the ways to move forward on this.
My question is, so many governments throughout history and now have reduced their citizens to mere ideologies instead of valued individuals. For example, the UK imprisoned pro-Palestinian protesters, making any membership or support of the group punishable by up to 14 years in prison. It's said that it's only punishing non-peaceful protesters, but there's been videos circling around all of social media showing the opposite of that. So although we haven't reached that level of suppressed speech in the US yet, we're like certainly getting there. My question is, how do we prevent our country from conforming or becoming complacent to tribalism enforced by legal punishment on grounds of ideologies and speech?
That's a fantastic question. Can I have you table that question until 3 o'clock? Because my dear brother Angel is a specialist in free speech. He really is actually a specialist in free speech. You don't talk more about that. I'll just say real briefly, one of the things that does make the American experiment unique is the freedom of speech. And we need to have it so free that people are actually free to say things that offend us. We need people to be free to say things that make us uncomfortable. We need the freedom that allows people to say things that make us really, really nervous. And when we mute that speech, this is when freedom begins to be undermined. We don't need less free speech. We need more free speech to hear everybody's ideas so we can put them out on the table to say, nope, that's crazy, that's good, that's kind of wild. No, I like that one a lot. Maybe we can work on that one. But we actually need it all out. And so I want a society of more free speech, not less free speech. I think one of the things that has really hampered us, and this is something Jonathan Haidt talked about as well, is that disagreeable speech is often considered violent speech, right? And he says this is really getting us nowhere, that speech isn't violent. And in that sense, it's a way of shutting down discourse. So one of the ways in which we sort of pursue this is to encourage free, disagreeable speech, to embrace discomfort, to embrace disagreement without demonizing and undermining the dignity of others. We need to practice that personally and then also structurally and institutionally. And our brother is going to talk about that a little bit at 3 o'clock. We're going to ask him, specialist on that. This brother, I'm telling you right now, this guy knows exactly what he's talking about.
I'll ask you just about your anthropological horse. I guess I'm skeptical about it. That said, tremendous agreement with almost everything you said, but the anthropological horse worries me. The history of political thought is full of people that were really concerned about what human nature is. And you can imagine somebody adopting a Hobbesian view and somebody adopting a Lockean view about human nature and just getting into an ideological disagreement about that. It seems like what we really need, and I think in part this is really what you're pushing for, is we need to pay attention to people as individuals with their own reasons and pay attention to their reasons. Nature of humanity, the nature of what it is to be a human individual, sort of a backseat to that, I think. But I just wanted to see what you thought about that.
Yeah, I would say that I think it's the front seat, and this is why the civil rights movement was what it was, because what King did, and he brought Abernathy in and Jesse Jackson and others, is to put that at the forefront and then to ask the world to think about, well, the country and the world to think about whether or not the rule of law is being applied equitably to all persons. One of the censures of some sections of the abolitionist movement was actually putting the person at the center. You can't do these things to other human beings. So I understand the skepticism. Like I said, it's messy and it's hard, but I want us to do the hard and messy work. I want us to really suffer through these sorts of discussions, because when we get it wrong, people are going to die and people are going to suffer. And again, the eugenics movement is a great example of that. When power structures are able to tribalize their views, then implement them through law. What we actually need instead of sort of tribal power structures is actually really diverse, messy structures that are slow and that allow us to debate things slowly over time so we can arrive at the truth together. I think one of the consequences of what you said is that you have these sort of tribal coalitions and they actually gain a lot of power, and then they execute they actually implement their ideologies through government structures, and the common person doesn't really have an opportunity to sort of speak into and resist. Sometimes they resist to the pain of death. What if we returned back to an area of discourse where disagreeable people are working through these issues together over time, really slowly, with the level of diverse views and diverse speech and diverse ideas that actually eliminated an ideological majority. It was so diverse and so messy and so slow that we arrived at these things over time. And I think this was the genius of the civil rights movement. This is why Dr. King wanted the human person at the center. I think this is why Dr. King, as a personalist, wanted to keep and elevate the actual dignity of African Americans as humans, and to put that at the forefront, and then to ask the question, if they're really truly human, are we applying the laws in a way that contributes to the flourishing of African Americans? It led to his death. That's how hard and messy it is to put the person at the center rather than ideology. And I think one of the things we've seen in human history is that those who've advocated the most for human persons as the center have often suffered the most egregious consequences of elevating that over ideology. Thank you for that.
Unfortunately, we are out of time for this session. Fortunately, this is but the first of 4 sessions today. Please join me in thanking our session chair, our formal respondents, and of course, Professor Bradley.